Hey guys, I wanted to preface this episode with a little intro. It's going to be a little bit of a different one than usual. It's a chat between two coaches, so me and Andy Morgan, and we do work with different clientele. So Andy works with males only, and he does muscle gain and fat loss stuff. We do things a little differently, but this episode is going to be really valuable for coaches themselves, anybody who's working with a coach currently or is just thinking about potentially working with a coach if they want to know more about that coach and client relationship. And then I'll catch up with you guys again at the end of the episode because I'm going to outline some key takeaways. Hope you enjoy this. Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marcus Sadu, and today we've got Andy Morgan on the show. Andy is a fitness author and online training and nutrition coach. He's been writing since 2011, and to date he's sold over 10,000 books, worked with over 1,000 people personally, and has had his work translated into 5 languages, aka he's got a ton of experience. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. That's the first time that anyone's described me like that. It's kind of weird. It's strange hearing myself like that. That kind of makes me sound I've been quite successful. I still see everything as very much a work in progress and lots of work to do. It's a pleasure to be on, and thank you for your time, and thank you to your listeners for tuning in.
Awesome, man. Well, I think as far as everything being a work in progress, I think that's the sign of a great coach too, that you're always learning, right?
Oh, always. And then the more I learn, the more I realize there is stuff to learn. And then the more I realize, oh my God, I've got to go back and update so many articles. And yeah, it's quite, but I love it.
It's a little bit daunting. It's a little bit daunting when you go back and look at some old stuff. I've had that experience too, where I looked at some old stuff and I'm like, idiot. Like and I take it down.
Yeah, I took, I think I went from about 130 articles to about 80 on my website. I just scrapped a bunch. I put pieces from stuff into other articles, and then I rewrote a bunch of stuff. I'm always rewriting, but I went through a big thing about 6 months ago, which Google hated me for. You live and learn. And then, yeah, I've still got a huge to-do list of things that I want to update. I think the content on there is going to be good. People, they like my website. That's ripbody.com. And I just see some holes and some tweaks sometimes that I think that my mind cannot settle until they're done. You know, there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely, man.
So the article that I released a couple of weeks ago on quote unquote fasted training, I published it and then I edited it, I think 15 times in the week since then. And and then it's like, well, why don't you just get it right in the first time, Andy? And it's like, okay, good point. It's like, why don't I just get it right in the first time? Well, trust me, I do my best to like get it right in the first time, but then you get some really good feedback and then you're like, yeah, okay, I can make that bit better. I can make that bit better. I can add some FAQs on the end and blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, oh my goodness, actually the metabolizable energy of the BCAAs that I mentioned was when they're protein bound, and I need to look at the freeform amino acids, right? Okay, bit of geek speak there, but still, like, you have to get all these things right. And yeah, it's always a work in progress, because every question that I get from people in the comments on the articles on my site, I see that as an opportunity to learn. So what I have to ask myself is, why are they asking this question? Is it because my article wasn't good enough? Like it didn't address that point? Is it because they're just asking a question totally off topic? Or is it because they just clearly didn't read? So instead of looking at questions that I have as a negative, I look at it as an opportunity to potentially learn and question whether I've got any holes in my work there first, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense, man. And I think that's an amazing way to look at it, because as we put out content, it's so easy to, if somebody has, maybe they have constructive criticism or something, but if we take that personally and then we miss that learning opportunity to make that information even better or just learn ourselves, yeah, we sort of miss that, don't we?
Yeah. So this I think this attitude shows in the way that I write, edit, and answer comments on the site. And the value in that to me and to my potential customers is that they get a feeling for me. They get to see my knowledge. They get to see that I care in the way that I answer the comments and write the articles. And therefore, they get a feeling of whether I'm the right person for them before they click the coaching application button. So I'm a coach. I make some money from books that I've written, but I don't have a pushy sell on my website. It's the content front and center and the results that it can get people. And then I've got a results tab with about 100 client results and testimonials. And this is mainly to say, yo, you can do it. You can apply this and do it. And then if people get stuck, maybe they want to hire me for coaching. But I don't want them to come to the coaching page first thing without knowing who I am, about me, without trusting me first, really. So what I would say to people listening, if they're in a position and looking to hire someone, is do your due diligence before hiring someone. Have a chat with them and see what they're about. Now, okay, that might be difficult in some circumstances. Let's say you wanted to jump on Skype and have a chat with me before hiring me. You can't do that. That's not actually an option. But we can have an email back and forth. But before you even spend time emailing back and forth or applying, you can read through the articles that I put out. You can read through the comments that are there. You can go and check out someone's Facebook page, maybe ask them a question there, see how they respond, see if they're helpful. Do you get a good feeling for that person? So that then when you're in the position of being coached, you trust them. So you don't second guess things. And I think that's important as well. It's not that you don't want to apply critical thinking to the advice that you're being given, but you want to be able to trust that person so that you trust the advice that's been given, because you're always going to hear some conflicting advice somewhere. And that's because there's a lot of bullshit in this industry, because the money to be made in this industry is from having a loud voice talking about a bit of bullshit that sounds scientific, but it's actually not. So that's a tip that I would have for people when they're looking to hire someone, you see. And that's why that's kind of my business model, and that's why I do these things. I guess it's twofold. I update the articles and I answer the comments because I feel that I need to update the articles. I just have to have my best work and I enjoy it. And then answering comments, like I know that it helps people, and also, yeah, it works as a trust machine. So
that's great for somebody that's possibly looking at hiring a coach, because I think something that's kind of overlooked is just simply a feeling of, does this coach's message resonate with me? Does it sort of make sense to me? Like, is it, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, oh man, that just makes sense. That seems like this person is, like you said, trustworthy, and that message just sort of clicks.
Exactly, yeah. And also, you need to see whether the way that this person writes or speaks, their voice speaks to you, which may sound obvious, but my voice doesn't speak to everybody, and that's fine. Like some people are put off by the bluntness of some of my answers sometimes, but sometimes I think people need bluntness in the answers so that they wake up. If some people will really, really appreciate that, and some people hate that. But I don't care, because that's who I am. And I'm not prepared to be anyone else, because I'm happy with that side of my personality. of course, I try and check myself sometimes because you can get yourself in trouble. And I certainly did more in my past, but I've matured a bit now. But, you've got to check that the way that they speak speaks to you, is what you want, I think.
Very cool. So in your eyes, what are a couple of the things that come to mind when you think of the most commonly overlooked aspects of coaching people? What do coaches overlook that maybe they could get so much more out of the client coaching relationship? They might overlook something that is way more important than maybe you'd think.
This is a tough one because I don't have that many in-person conversations with other coaches, really. So I can guess, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I think one thing that in the conversations that I have had that people seem to come away and be impressed by is the level to which I go to check that the clients I work with are a match first before working with them, which is, of course, a fortunate function of having enough people apply that I can do that without being on the poverty line, I guess. So I understand the dilemma that a new coach may find themselves in, which might be that they take someone on that they probably shouldn't have, but they need the money. So I would say get financially stable so you don't, in some other way, so you don't have to do that first. And then another thing I do is, as part of that intake process, is before any money or anything is discussed, I'll give them a fairly detailed application form questionnaire, and I'll ask them, I think it's 13 or 14 questions. I'm trying to dig deep into where they're at in terms of their physique, their training experience, their motivations. Why are they doing what they want to do? I'll come back to that in a minute. I think that's really important. What their goals are, short-term and long-term, why those goals matter to them, what their diet experience is up until that point, because that could affect the plan immediately moving forward, and what their preferences are regarding their training and their diet. And then that factors into the plan that you may or may not give them, because someone might have a preference for something that is just not doing them any good. So you might need to call it out there and then at that stage. So then I'll reply in detail with some recommendations and suggestions on what I think we should do, what I think they should do, if we were to work together or not, and then how long things would take to get to point X. Usually that's a body fat percentage or degree of ab visibility, because I work with men. So obviously that's more realistic than with women. Or if we're bulking at this point, then rate of weight gain per month to shoot for, and how much of that could potentially be muscle. And of course, there's some guesswork in there. Then points about keeping their stress low, sleeping enough, and how many times a week I think we'd need to train in there, right? So then that's a filter. So then people are like, okay, well, do they like what I said or not? So then they kind of see whether they're interested in working with me or not, because they might just drop off at that point without even hearing about the pricing, which will come next. But I think that's really important, because I think it forms the basis of a plan. So just making sure that the client is bought into a very specific plan of action before you start working together, so that when things get tough for them, you can then bring them back. Okay, so when things get tough for them, they don't start second guessing everything. So what's a common scenario that people go through? They want to cut, so they want to get leaner, and then they want to bulk up afterwards. So in this scenario, I'm talking about the non-newbie trainee. If you're fairly new to strength training, then you can lose fat and build muscle at the same time in most cases there. But once you've got a degree of experience, you can't really do both in a way that is measurable enough to be both motivating and to be able to accurately make tweaks to the diet on, because the data points are not clear and defined enough, because the changes are so subtle. So that means you're basically left with a decision. You either go for fat loss or muscle gain. So in that scenario, generally I'd recommend that people shred down first and then bulk up, because that's going to make bulking, the muscle gain phase, easier to control and easier to minimize the fat gain. And people, they get to a kind of whoa shit point when they're dieting generally, where they feel that they're getting skinny. And that's the point just before the definition comes through. And they need to be reminded that they need to keep going and why we're doing this. And that brings them back to our goal that we laid out and the why that they drilled down to onto why they are doing this, why they want this. And this is where it becomes really important that the client trusts you. So with that clear strategy outlined at the start, with the trust there and with knowing their why, then I can help push them through that phase where they feel skinny, which happens to everybody because everyone carries more fat. Anybody who's never shredded down before properly thinks that they've got about half the fat to lose than they actually do. You've experienced that yourself, haven't you?
Oh yeah.
It's a humbling experience.
It really is. And I mean, if you just got so much less muscle, I had so much less muscle than I thought. It's almost like you're disappearing and you're like, shit, I guess I need to train a little more.
Yeah, basically. But at that point, there's nothing you can do. So people second guess it and they're like, okay, I'm going to bulk. And I'm like, whoa. Sorry, what? You're going to bulk now? Well, you didn't finish the cut. So then what were you cutting for? So you need, this is why having that clear goal outlined at the start is important. And I'll say to people, you're going to have this whoa shit moment. That's okay. Expect it, embrace it, push through. Because it's better to be temporarily a little skinnier than you wanted than fatter than you wanted for a longer period. For most people. And also, there is physiologically there's an issue with, if you do get fatter for a period than you wanted, when you say you bulked up instead of cut down first, and I'm talking about people that they already have, say, they've already got a bit of a belly, right? They wouldn't want to bulk up from that point because they're going to end up creating more fat cells that they didn't have originally, which is going to, and they're never going to disappear. They will empty like fat cells. Imagine them like balloons. They can be filled with air, and then when they're totally full and they're about to burst, then a new fat cell is created instead of them popping, right? But when you diet down, the balloons deflate, so the fat is out of them, but the balloons are still there, and that has effects on hunger signaling permanently from that point forward. So that means it can make maintaining being lean a little bit tougher, it is thought. So that's another reason why you probably wouldn't want to bulk. You wouldn't want to go into a muscle gain phase at that point. So that, again, that explaining that to the client at that point when they're like, and they want to quit, that becomes important as well. So I'll try and get that out there before. So maybe those two things. I guess if I had to summarize of my 10-minute ramble, it would be thorough goal setting at the outset.
Well, yeah, coming back to that, how deep do you get into somebody's why? So if somebody comes to you and says, I want to look good on the beach, are you automatically going to dig deeper than that, or are you accepting that and saying, okay, cool, like that's a strong enough why to come back to? Or how far into the weeds are you going with that?
May I do this with you now?
Sure.
What's your goal?
Muscle gain.
Right now?
Yes.
Muscle gain?
Yep.
All right. Why?
Because I've taken about 2 to 3 years off training hard. And so I'm feeling rejuvenated, and I'm wanting to get stronger again, wanting to get bigger again, and just see where I can take my body.
And why is that important to you?
I find it fun.
Okay, but why? You find it fun, so that's the reason that you do it. But why are you going to put in the hours to get down to the gym and prepare all the food and push through those last 3 reps on your 4th set of leg presses when your body's just screaming, no, 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 but they need to be done? What's pushing you through there?
I've played a lot of competitive sports, and now this is sort of that challenge for myself to... I'm basically playing against myself, but it's my version of a sport, essentially.
All right. So when the going gets tough, like super tough, like say things are really hard with your job, or are you married?
No, but I do have a girlfriend.
Okay. When, let's say, you go away, you're going to go traveling, and you now need to carve out an hour to go train. What's going to keep you doing that? What's the why that's going to push you to do that?
I'd say, well, one big thing is my word. If I've committed to it, I don't see another option. As far as I said I was going to do this, I've set a time frame out, all that sort of thing, and that's really important to me. That I said that I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. So I think, yeah, it comes back to that personal challenge. I said I was going to do it. It's difficult, but I'm enjoying this process, and I want to see the outcome.
All right, cool. You want to do me?
Sure. What's your current goal?
My current goal is to get back to the point where I can see all of my abs.
And where are you at now?
I can see the upper 2. So I'd say I'm about 14% body fat or something like that, which might be about 21-ish% for a woman that has a fairly decent level of muscle mass.
Why is a 4-pack not enough, but a 6-pack is, for example?
Right, because I want to physically represent to my clients. I don't want to be that coach that is not in good shape. And I don't believe that I need to be in better shape than all of my clients in order to I don't believe that I need to be bigger than everybody that I coach at all. There is a part of genetics that is out of my control, but I want to be the best that I can be, because through my experiences and my struggles, I learn, and that helps me become a better coach. And I guess if we were to go really deep into like fears, then I would hate to meet a client in person and disappoint them in some way. Like, Andy's not in very good shape. Maybe I can't trust him. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense, man. It's tricky because, well, that's a pretty big driving factor. It's a lot of pressure, right? So, I mean, that can actually help you achieve your goal. And I know I've felt that same thing. It's like, if I put something out publicly, I've told people that I'm going to do this. My clientele are hearing this, all that sort of stuff. So it's almost like an added sense of, your business is an added sense of accountability. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do. What I've done is I purposefully not put myself, I don't post selfies for my business. I think a lot of fitness professionals do. I think the problem with that is that if your business is based on how you look primarily, or that is a driving factor for your business, then what happens if you were to get sick or had an accident, God forbid? Your business is now threatened. So I've purposefully put the articles and the information and the clients and their results and what I can do for them front and center, which does take the pressure off of me. So like, I'm not posting any selfies, and it's just not really what I'm about. I'm not bagging on anyone that does by any means. I think they can be very motivational and helpful for people. I just get people to get that through the results that I get for clients.
Very cool. Now, what do you think back, say, to earlier on in your career? You've been doing this for 6 or 7 years, correct?
Yeah, coming up on 7 years.
So what do you wish that you knew earlier in your coaching career?
Everything. What do I wish I knew? It's another way of asking, what's a mistake that I've made? Or what are some mistakes that I've made in the past? I think I would like to have... Okay, I'm going to caveat this. I was very fortunate to start at the time when I already had access to some really good information sources, like Alan Aragon in his research review, and Martin Birkin's leangains.com, and Lyle McDonald, and now we've got examine.com, and we've got Eric Helms and the 3D Muscle Journey guys, and the content that they put out, this evidence-based stuff. And so, in fact, my start in the industry really came when I stumbled upon this stuff and realized that the industry really had lied to me. Not to make it personal, but lied to me specifically.
Lied to Andy.
But bodybuilding.com told me that I needed pre, post, intra-workout, plus all these other supplements, and it turns out, and I needed to eat 6 meals a day, which was a huge pain in the ass, but actually I didn't. And I could have got away with 2 or 3 meals. And so I was carrying around my protein shaker in a fanny pack when I used to go on big long rides or hikes, thinking that I needed to have protein every 3 hours, otherwise my muscles would fall off, and this is total nonsense. Like, God damn it! And that sudden realization was like, I'm going to try and do something to fight these assholes in the industry. And so I started blogging, and I started doing it in English and in Japanese. I live in Japan, I live in Tokyo, and there was really nothing like these guys, the information that these guys put out in Japanese. So I wanted to be that. We've now taken that little blog, and it's now pretty much the most respected fitness website in Japan. That's athletebody.jp for all of your readers that read Japanese. All of your listeners.
There might be a couple, yeah.
And that was my start in the industry, really, anger. So I don't have anything to say, that back in that time when I was recommending people, they have their pre-workout, intra-workout, and they have 7 meals a day. I really regret recommending that to people. I don't have that. But I could totally see that was something that I would have had, right, if I'd have started a year earlier.
Right.
I would say, for me personally, I think I started off, one of the coaching packages that I offered was an initial setup only. And then all of the other coaching packages I offered for the first 4 years were 12 weeks maximum only. So it was 12 weeks. There was nothing less, nothing more. And I think limiting it at 12 weeks was good for a goal set for people, to set a goal in someone's mind. But it did me and my education and the client an injustice by leaving it at that point. I think I would have learned a lot more by moving forward and working with people for longer periods. Because that's when it starts getting interesting, just at the 12-week point. And so I would remove that rule, which I did back in 2015. And then regarding the initial setup phase that I did for people, I offered a package which was just, I would give them, after like obviously some questions and back and forth, I would give them a suggested training plan, and then macro targets that I think would be right for them, along with some advice on how to hit those targets, some advice on how to track their progress, and then some advice on how to adjust things. I think I would scrap that because I can make my best guess at what's going to be appropriate, but it's not going to be 100%. And key is having a look at the data to see how things are working and then adjusting and tweaking it to get people on track. And so I would only have offered the continuous coaching back then. But, at that time, I didn't know. I must have done a reasonably good job. Otherwise, I wouldn't have I think I've got a pretty good reputation. I changed that when I realized about it. I think after a year, I stopped offering that one in particular. So now what I do is I have check-ins with people after the initial setup. They check in with me every 2 weeks. I like that extra contact. I like that pace as well. I think anything shorter than that, people can sometimes get a little bit, they can second guess things when they have like a weight fluctuation or a bad day training in the gym, right? And so it helps people to get out of their own head a little bit. And anything longer than that, and it could be just a little bit too long to keep people feeling accountable. I think every 4 weeks can certainly work in terms of the adjustments that you make, but I think it's good to have people check in just to, keep in touch, and so they feel that accountability there.
Totally. Yeah, I have a little bit of a different clientele than you do, but I have my clients check in every week, and that can be an issue, the smaller weight fluctuations and getting wrapped up in the scale a little too much. That is a potential downfall. But I do find that if I don't hear from someone for a couple of weeks, it's typically not a great sign. And sometimes people have fallen off a little bit. So I feel like that weekly accountability, just for me and my clients, works quite well. So do you have a few sayings or general principles that you tend to dish out quite often? For example,
more is more. Fight bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Like those sort of sayings. Do you have a few of those?
I mean, jokingly, yes, but no, not really. It's just that the thing is that so many things I feel need to be caveated, because I can say something that will apply to 90% of people, and then 10% of people would just get screwed by it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Just damn. So like, more is more. Generally, more training volume is generally going to get more results. And for most people, they could benefit from probably doing a little more. But there is a small minority of people that probably they're already, and that just comes down to personality type, they're already pushing themselves too hard and they could benefit from a little less, right?
Right.
And then also more is more. I quite like this in terms of like, look, I think one thing where the industry is going right now is we're using trainers as setting workouts and telling people to cut their intensity at a certain rating of perceived exertion. So RPE based on the number of reps in reserve. So that's popularized by Mike Toucher, and who's a legendary powerlifter and powerlifting coach. And now but Eric Helms got his, my co-author on the muscle and strength pyramids, he got his PhD kind of in RPE. So coaches are now, what's quite common is to say to people, okay, go to an RPE of 8. So it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And what that means is leave 2 reps in the tank. on your sets. And that is a way of limiting fatigue buildup with the idea that it will help you get more training volume in overall. The problem with that is if you give that guideline to the average trainee, it does them an injustice. So you have to be very careful with who you give that guideline to. Of course, everybody looks to people that are a couple of levels ahead of them and wants to copy what they're doing rather than doing something that's necessarily appropriate for themselves. So the problem is you get people who don't know how to push themselves hard, who look at those RPE guidelines and push themselves even less hard. So let's take the leg press, for example, right? If you do a 20 rep leg press set to an RPE of 10, you see Jesus on the 19th and 20th rep. Right? This is not pleasant at all. But most people, they will get to 14 and they're like, yeah, that was an RPE of 9. Yeah, I couldn't do any more. It's like nonsense. You just don't know how to go harder.
Yeah, I think it's that classic, you're sitting on a leg press, okay, you just finished 12 reps, you cannot do any more, and then somebody puts a gun to your head and you're like, pump out 5 more, and you're like, I got 10. So it's a little tricky because that RPE is so subjective, right? I mean, it's so relative to the person, and I think that, like you said, beginner trainees have no clue how far they can push themselves at that point. It's only as they progress in their training that they have more experience, and then they're like, okay, now I have an actual realistic view of my legit RPE.
Yeah, so one thing I do now, and what I'd probably recommend to the majority of listeners is for your sets, generally speaking, and don't let this advice like override any advice that you've been given by your trainer if you have been given a program and instructions. But if you haven't, if you're not in that position, what I'd say is do your sets, do as many reps as you can for your sets, but stop a rep shy of going to failure. And when I say failure here, I'm talking about form failure, not failure in the sense of you're unable to move the load anymore. So what I mean by form failure is where there's a breakdown in the way that you are lifting the weight with good form. So if we take the, let's say the bench press, for example. No, let's use the squat. We're squatting. True failure is where you would go down in the hole, you'd squat down, and you wouldn't be able to bring the weight back up. You'd have to collapse and get it in the safety rack. You definitely never want to go there. But what I would say is push yourself so that you can just about finish that set. Do as many reps as you need so that set was really hard. And don't go to form failure. And form failure is where, let's say you're coming back out of the hole and you go a little bit over onto your left side, but you're finding that more powerful and the form's now kind of gone to shit. Don't go to that point.
That's a really, really great distinction because that's going to keep trainees safe, which is the most important, and injury-free, and then they can train long-term. So go to form failure. I really like that you made that distinction, Andy.
Go to just prior to it. Yeah.
Or prior to it, sorry. So if folks want to find more about you, your work, you mentioned the Rip Body site. I can link to that in the show notes. Where can folks find out more about Andy Morgan?
Yeah, just ripbody.com. You can go there, and then there's links to everything on there.
Okay, perfect. And then social handles, all that good stuff? Yeah,
social handles, you just scroll to the very bottom of the site and you'll see the links there.
Beautiful, man. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes. And again, thanks for coming on. That was a really enjoyable chat.
Well, thank you. I hope this was interesting and useful to you guys listening. And if you're still here, thanks.
You made it to the end.
I can appreciate I might have gone off the deep end with some geeky details at some points.
No, I think it'll be useful, man. Getting into the weeds is fun. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Andy Morgan. I wanted to leave you with a few key takeaways. So one is that your coach or whoever you're working with or whoever you're thinking about working with is always learning. And one sign of that is just that somebody is changing their opinion or adapting their opinion. I'm not talking about on major principle stuff, not the foundations, but just tweaking things. That's a good sign that a coach is learning and adapting their coaching process via experience. The second one is, does their message resonate with you? So does it essentially make sense? Does their information apply to you? And does it feel like they're speaking to you personally? Is their specialty lining up with your goals? And then lastly, just ask yourself, do I trust this person? Is their message consistent? Do they have results to back up their experience and all that sort of stuff? So I hope you guys got a lot out of this episode. A little bit different today, but I thought it was a necessary one to talk about coaching, the coaching experience. If you're even thinking about hiring a coach, what to look for. And also, if there are any coaches that are actually listening to this and thinking about getting into more coaching online or anything like that. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll catch you on the next episode.